Welcome back to The Explainer. So, have you ever noticed that the literal second you are told you absolutely cannot do something, it suddenly becomes the only thing in the entire world you want to do? It's this universally frustrating human experience. We set up these strict rules to fix a problem, and yet, those exact same rules completely backfire. Today, we are going to unpack exactly why that happens, and more importantly, how we can communicate better.
It's the ultimate question, right? Why do we always want exactly what we can't have? Why does human nature just instinctively rebel against restrictions? Well, let's dive right in and solve the core mystery behind this behavioral loop. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll define the forbidden fruit effect, walk through 3 everyday examples, take a peek behind the scenes at how our brains process this, go over some practical everyday remedies, and wrap up with the crucial exception to the rule. All right, let's kick things off with part 1, the forbidden fruit effect.
The fancy, formal psychology term for this is psychological reactance. Basically, it's a hardwired response where any perceived threat to your personal autonomy actually increases your attraction to whatever choice is being restricted. What that means is when someone looks at you and says no, your brain doesn't just logically evaluate the thing you're missing out on. Nope. It reacts to that sudden feeling that your independence is under attack. You end up craving the forbidden option even more, simply to prove to yourself that you are still the one in control.
So, how does this actually play out in real life? Let's move into part 2 and look at 3 everyday examples. Picture a classic scenario, a strict parent and a teenager. The parent, probably out of totally genuine concern, draws a hard line in the sand and says, "You are absolutely not allowed to date that person." Now, what's the typical teenager going to do here? Do they just say, "Oh, okay, sounds good, thanks for the advice"? Yep, no way. In reality, the teenager actually becomes way more curious and emotionally attached. Psychology research consistently shows us that the relationship becomes vastly more appealing simply because it's completely off limits. The crucial takeaway here is that the teenager's rebellion isn't even really about the romance itself. It's mostly about protecting their personal freedom. They hear that absolute rule and translate it to, "You don't trust me," or "I can't make my own decisions." And during adolescence, when independence is basically everything, that perceived threat just triggers massive reactance.
Let's pivot to example number 2 over in the workplace. Imagine a manager who is totally stressed about looming deadlines and snaps at their team, "Don't suggest any new ideas, just follow instructions." They think they're streamlining things and optimizing efficiency, but let's look at what actually goes down.
Modern organizational psychology tells us this kind of restriction completely backfires. When you forcefully shut down ideas, people don't magically stop thinking. They actually start thinking about improvements even more. But instead of helping the company, they just whisper those brilliant ideas privately. They feel significantly less engaged. And eventually, they take all that creativity and jump ship to a workplace that actually gives them some autonomy. It brilliantly illustrates that people deeply need their knowledge to matter. Tight control literally suffocates innovation and motivation.
For our third example, let's look at personal goals, specifically strict dieting. Someone decides to drop the hammer and makes an absolute rule: "I will never eat chocolate again."
As behavioral research proves time and time again, this kind of rigid food rule is basically a recipe for failure. Within days, or honestly sometimes literally just hours, the cravings go through the roof. Why? Because the brain zeroes in on what has suddenly become scarce or forbidden. The mere act of restricting it artificially inflates the perceived value of that chocolate. It goes from being just a random snack in the pantry to being the absolute most desirable thing on the planet.
Okay, so we've seen it in parenting, management, and dieting. Now in section 3, let's go behind the scenes and look at the actual cognitive mechanics connecting all these situations.
Let's walk through how this builds step by step in the brain. Step 1, your freedom feels threatened. Step 2, the brain immediately red flags this loss of autonomy. Step 3, because of that loss, curiosity instantly spikes. Step 4, since it's off limits, the forbidden option suddenly looks way more valuable. Step 5, the desire just grows and grows. And finally, step 6, people act out, doing the exact opposite of the rule just to subconsciously restore their sense of choice. It is a completely predictable mechanical loop.
So how do we break this loop? Let's move to section 4, everyday remedies, to see how we can totally transform our communication. Let's rewind to our parenting example. A harsh, restrictive command like, "You're forbidden from seeing them," just hits the panic button for reactance. But compare that to a collaborative approach. "Help me understand what you like about them. Here are my concerns. Let's discuss." See the difference? Instead of outright prohibiting, the parent asks questions, calmly explains their concerns, and sets boundaries while still giving the teenager a seat at the table. You guide them, but you completely preserve their autonomy.
In the workplace, instead of just crushing ideas entirely, consider this brilliant little management tweak. Let's finish today's work first, then we'll review your suggestions. This completely neutralizes the threat to autonomy. You aren't telling the employee their ideas are unwanted or bad. You are just hitting the pause button. This preserves their freedom and motivation while absolutely maintaining the immediate operational focus the manager needs.
And for dieting, rather than demanding rigid perfection and completely banning certain foods, go for a sustainable approach. Allow moderate portions, plan for occasional treats, and focus on balanced eating. Flexible approaches remove that artificial scarcity. You basically tell your brain it doesn't have to obsess, because nothing is truly forbidden.
So if we pull all of these remedies together, we get a really fantastic mental checklist you can apply to basically any situation. Number 1. Offer choices instead of barking absolute commands. Number 2, always explain the why behind the rules. Number 3, use collaborative language, stuff like, let's find a solution together. Number 4, try to drop absolute words like never and always. Those are massive triggers for reactants. And lastly, encourage people to take ownership of their decisions instead of forcing blind compliance.
Now, human behavior is messy and highly nuanced, which brings us to our final section, the exception to the rule. This is a really crucial counterargument. Turns out, the forbidden fruit effect isn't 100% universal. Enter the hot stove exception. This shows us that absolute, clear prohibitions actually work incredibly well when immediate safety is on the line. Telling a child to absolutely never touch a hot stove or strictly instructing workers not to step foot in a hazardous area, highly effective. Why? Because the restriction is instantly perceived as protective rather than controlling.
Let's break down exactly when restrictions fail versus when they succeed. They fail hard when they feel like an unnecessary attack on autonomy, when the reasons are left totally unexplained, or when it just feels like controlling behavior. On the flip side, prohibitions succeed when there is a strong foundation of trust, when the why is super clear, and when there's a real immediate safety consequence. When people genuinely understand and accept the purpose of the rule, that natural urge to rebel just vanishes.
Which leaves us with this final, really vital question to ask ourselves. Are the rules you're setting and communicating in your own life truly protecting someone's safety, or are they just unnecessarily threatening their autonomy? It's a pretty powerful thought to keep in your back pocket the next time you feel the urge to tell someone what they can or cannot do. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking those good questions.